Hello friends, it's Katie back with another episode of my vlog, and I have gotten multiple viewer requests for a tutorial where I show you guys how I do my applique style. That's how I make things like that, or like that, or like that. So let's find out how. All right, first things first, let's talk tools and equipment and supplies. So this is the jacket that I'm currently working on. I've already completed the Witch Bitch patch and the Skull Candle patch. And what I'm going to work on today and show you guys is this bottom section, which is the crossed wand and broomstick, which are kind of like, you know, skull and crossbones. Get it? So what we're going to need for this project are the jacket itself, obviously. I actually don't build my patches directly onto the jacket. I put them onto a piece of black canvas. It's a lot easier to manipulate and work with, and then it actually makes the whole thing stronger in the end. So I'm going to be building my appliques onto this piece of black canvas, not directly onto the jacket. And then the last step will be to put it on the jacket. I also need some fabric in the colors that I want to use for my applique. I'm just using regular quilting cotton. I think it's Kona solid colors. I'm not sure what the names are, but whatever fabric you want to use. If you use felt for your applique, the edges won't fray, which is really helpful if you're just starting out. I use cotton and I use a zigzag stitch to cover up the edges so that they can't fray, if you can see that there. I'm also going to need a Sharpie to transfer my drawing. I'm going to need my original drawings of what it is that I want to make into an applique. I've also colored my drawing because obviously that's very helpful for me when I'm trying to make this applique. I use a fusible webbing product. I use Pellon Wonder Under. It's just a product that has basically a thin piece of paper on one side, and then the other side is a light coating of adhesive, which is going to melt when you apply heat to it. So another tool I need is an iron. And then the last thing I'm going to need is a sewing machine that can do a zigzag stitch and thread in the colors that match with my fabric choices. All right. Once you've got all that stuff together, you are ready to rock and roll. This fusible webbing product, I've tried a bunch of different ones, and Wonder Under is, for my money, the best quality for the lowest price point. There's lots and lots of different options. If you can't find Wonder Under, any type of fusible webbing will do that has a paper backing on it that you can draw on. All right, let's get cracking. Okay, so the first step is transferring your drawing or your image from your original drawing onto your fusible webbing. If your design is one directional, like not symmetrical, what you want to do is actually flip your original drawing over and then trace the shapes from the back side onto the fusible webbing. The reason why you want to do this is you're going to draw the shape on the fusible webbing, and then you're going to take that, fuse it to the fabric, and then turn the fabric back over when you stick that shape down onto your base layer. So if you have something like words, letters, something that has to face in a certain direction, you really want to make sure to take the extra step of flipping your original drawing over and tracing on the back side of your drawing. Now, with these two drawings, they really aren't directional, and it doesn't matter which way I do it. So just for clarity on the video, because it's easier to see the drawing from the front side, I'm going to do it that way. But like I said, most of the time what I do is flip it over and trace from the back side. You'll also notice I am using like a tracing paper, and that's part of the reason why I do my preparatory drawings on paper like this, is so that I can flip it either way and I can see my line from either side of the paper. The other thing to note is that I have colored my drawing as a key for myself so that I know which parts are going to be green and which parts are going to be purple in the final thing. Now I'm going to make a little shape on my fusible webbing paper for each shape that I'm going to need for the applique, but I want to actually line them up close to each other by color. That is, I want to put the star here, just trace the shape of it. That's what the Sharpie's for. You can use a different pen if you want, but I've found Sharpie works the best. So trace your shape onto your fusible webbing, and then whatever other thing you have that's going to be the same color, you want to also trace as close to your original shape on this fusible webbing as you can. And then the reason why is what we're going to do with that is we're going to fuse the fusible webbing to our, in this case, the purple fabric. And then, ooh, I'm slipping. I just let that move while I was talking. And then we're going to cut them out. So it's okay if they're pretty close together. I normally don't put them quite that close, but that's fine. Also, with regard to this little piece here, I could make the two parts of the broom straw separate pieces. I'm not going to, though. I'm going to make that one big piece, and then I'm just going to let the green, which represents kind of where the, I guess it would be like, you know, like wrapped around here. So I'm going to make that out of a separate piece and lay it over the top. So that's it for the purple pieces of what I want to do. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to trace the green pieces. This piece of fusible webbing is not quite long enough, and I'm going to be honest, I actually already did this step off camera, just like a cooking show. So the next step here would be to take a little pair of scissors, whatever you got, and cut this out pretty close to the edge of what you want, because anywhere that you have this fusible webbing and you iron it down to your fabric where you don't need it for the applique, you're just wasting fabric and fusible webbing. So I save this stuff down to pretty small pieces, and I try to cut as small of pieces as possible out of my fabric. So the next step here would be to unfold this fabric, so I only have one thickness, take it into the other room and use my iron at the ironing board to iron this down onto the purple fabric. Like I said, I already did that off camera, so I'm just gonna swoop this stuff out of the way, but that is the first step of how you get the image onto the fusible webbing. So let's just move that out of the way and bring these guys over here. Hey, look, just like a cooking show, I've already done that part. So as you can see, these pieces of the fusible webbing are now stuck down to my fabric. I can peel them off, but I don't want to yet. I'm going to cut them out before I peel them off. I did neglect to mention in the first segment, the other thing you're going to want to have is a sharp pair of scissors, which can cut through fabric and paper. This is kind of a no-no. I hate that term, but whatever. In the sewing world, you know, you're supposed to only cut fabric with your fabric scissors. I have never had a problem cutting this combination of paper fused to fabric with these scissors. I've been using the same pair of scissors for 20 years. I get them sharpened about once a year. Totally no problem. But you might want to use a different pair of scissors if you haven't tested that out yourself. So the next step is to cut these things out. I like to cut, hopefully I've got that right on camera. I like to cut just along the outside edge of the Sharpie line, but keep it a little straighter. Like if my Sharpie line is a little wiggly back and forth, I try to keep my cut line nice and straight, because that's what I really want to look good. I'm gonna blunt the points of these stars, or this star, because I know that when I come through to do the stitching part of this applique, it's gonna be hard to get a super tight point, and it's much easier to have that kind of cut across point on there. So I'm just gonna go around and cut this out, like I said, and that's how you get your applique ready to be fused down. Hopefully this isn't too boring, and I think I'm going to have to do some time lapse on this video or something, because this might be a long tutorial, but I want to clearly show all of the steps. And one thing I'll mention about my cutting technique, I don't know if you guys are noticing this, but I'm keeping the scissors in one place. I'm not like turning them as I'm cutting. I always keep the scissors in this like perfect one work spot right in front of my eyes, and then turn my work to meet the scissors. Always works better than trying to turn your scissors around your work. So that star is now ready to go. And if you flip it over, looks great. And look at that. It matches almost exactly with my drawing. So now I'm going to go ahead and cut out the rest of these, and I'll be right back for the next step. All right, now that I have everything cut out and ready to fuse down, I have to make sure it's placed correctly. This piece of paper right here is actually a drawing of the back of that jacket so that I have a flatter surface to work with. And if you'll remember, what I had was this skull candle patch crossing over this kind of point at the back yoke. And then this piece, little off camera, but coming down and crossing those two seams. So that's kind of how I know I have the placement right of that. And then the next piece is I want to make sure, don't lose any of these pieces, that I am getting them in the right place. So I want to do this as a crisscross that's kind of like low and wide, but you know, not too low like that. I think that looks a little funky. I want it a little higher, but obviously these pieces are going to bump into the bottom corners of the architecture of the jacket if I go much higher than that. I'm not going to leave this thing a rectangle, so it's okay that this is crossing over the front of the skull, because after I'm done creating the applique onto this piece of fabric, I'm actually going to trim out around the edge of this piece. So it'll be an X-shaped patch. So I'm pretty sure that that is pretty much how I want this proportioned. That looks about right to me. And so you got to kind of get into just some eyeballing here. You can get really specific with like pins and measuring and everything, but I don't tend to. I just kind of, grab it and say, yeah, that's about right. And then set that down on here and make sure that that all fits in there. Yeah, that looks good. So now the next step is to correctly position all of my various applique pieces. And this part is going to be a little bit tricky. There's a lot of pieces here, and these long skinny ones are a little bit problematic. But basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to first peel that paper backing off of the back. This also gets a little tricky if you don't have any fingernails. It can be tough, but you just want to release the paper from the glue backing. So the way that I've peeled that off, I've removed the paper, and now that thin webbing made of glue is actually attached to the back of this piece of fabric. So that piece is ready to go, and I'm just going to kind of drop it into place where it should be-ish. And then I'm going to actually take the other long skinny piece, because these are kind of like the most important pieces here to get in the right spot. And once I've got them kind of loaded in, the other pieces should fall into place correctly. Now, you do need to watch out and be careful with this when you're peeling it. Sometimes you can actually peel the glue away from the fabric. So you do have to pay some attention there, and you can get some kind of rough spots around the edges, but that's okay. We're going to correct that in the end with the sewing part. So this piece is going to go here. I guess I also need to decide who's going across the top of who here. Wow, this is going to get really tricky. But basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out the exact placement of this and get these paper guys out of the way, which I know it's like, wait, I put it on top of the paper. But again, this is a great case for the paper itself being clear. So I can do this, heyo, and then check my alignment here and make sure everything's right. I can see that I knocked this, and this is going down a little too far, so I'm going to actually pull this guy up a little bit. I want those top corners to be what's kind of representing this thing. So that looks about right for what I want. So next what I'm going to do is I think I'm going to go back into time-lapse mode just so this video isn't a million years long. But I'm going to peel the backing off of each of these things and then carefully place them on here. And then I'm actually going to take the whole thing into the other room and iron it down. I'm not going to show the ironing on video, but it's very basic. You just want to make sure that your pieces don't shift around before you iron anything, obviously. I use cotton heat setting and I iron each segment for about 10 seconds, maybe 15 seconds, until I can kind of run my finger at the edge of it and try to pull it up and nothing happens there. So that's the next thing I'm going to do, but I'm going to go into time warp mode, so I'm not going to be able to talk. I've got everything ironed down now, so this thing is fully flexible and can move all around and be twisted, and the pieces aren't going to fall off. Now, if I really, really tried, I could peel these pieces back off. I don't really want to try because the next step is to add the stitched detailing. So I'm going to move over to the sewing machine next, and basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a zigzag stitch at the very edge of each piece of fabric in the same color that the fabric is. Here is a done patch in that style. As you can see, there's a thin green zigzag edge binding the entire edge of the design down to the black fabric. I then also added in this green edge to define each of the 4 cards, because obviously it's supposed to be a little hand of cards. And then you can see that I also did the same matching zigzag stitching on the edge of the purple heart. And what that does is it gives it a really nice, defined, bold, solid edge, but the zigzag stitch also stops the fabric underneath from fraying, because that's what would happen if we didn't do the zigzag stitch. All of these little teeny tiny threads that you can see right at the edge would all start to pick out and pull out over time, and the whole thing would get kind of a fuzzy edge on it. That's actually how I used to do my appliques, and then this is my newer style that I have developed that lasts a lot longer and doesn't start to fray and show its age quite so quickly. So let's move over to the sewing machine, and I think I am going to go back into time-lapse mode just because this takes a little while. But if you look closely, what you'll see is I'm going to start with the green thread, and basically I'm going to do these 2 sides of the wand and then the other end of the wand, and then I'll come back and do this whole loop of the broomstick. Now I will say, when I first started doing this applique style, what I did was I built each layer of the picture separately. I would have put just that green wand down and stitched it down, and then put the one that crosses it down and stitched that down. And then I would have added the purple elements afterwards. But I've been doing this for so many years. I've figured out some shortcuts, and I figured out how to just get the whole picture fused into place first and then move over to the sewing machine. So let's check out how this sews down. All right, so as you can see, I have finished stitching down the edges of all of my applique pieces with the same color of thread that I used the color of fabric for the applique section. But now it's time to add the final details, which I'm gonna add with black thread. In my original drawings, I drew that part with black. As you can see, the broom has a lot more detail on it than the wand does. That's okay. There's a couple of different ways to do this. I use a washout marker to make my marks. You can eyeball it. It's kind of hard to see exactly where you're putting the line of thread when the piece is in the sewing machine. So that can get a little tricky. I find it's easier to eyeball this type of thing if I'm hand sewing it. So I do like to give myself some guidelines. You can use a regular pencil and then just cover up the pencil line with your stitching, but I like to use this washout marker. It's pretty cool. It leaves a blue line, and then after you're done, you just take a damp cloth and like press it into the surface of the piece, and it's just going to erase that. So as you can see, both of my my long handles of my broom and my wand have just a little curvy line right up at the top to indicate, hey, this is a three-dimensional stick, right? So we'll add one of those on each side. And as you can see, it's a really light line that this marker leaves. You can barely see it, but it's enough to follow as a stitching guide when it's in the machine. And then, like I said, it just comes off with water when you're done. So a slightly complicated bit here is at the end of the broom. I just want to give it some, you know, some extra detail depth here by adding what would be the actual kind of lines separating. You can imagine this is something that's wrapped around the handle of the broom, and then up here, obviously we've got the lines separating kind of the top section of the broom and just indicating. You can see I'm going over a couple times with this marker. It's pretty light, but it does leave a decent line to follow if you do it a couple times. If you're doing it on something that you're going to wash out, like actually put in the washing machine later, you can actually use like Crayola washable markers, which are cheaper than this type of one. But I'm not actually going to be doing that because I'm not going to wash this whole jacket when I'm done with it. So I need something where I can just hit it, you know, spot treat it with a little bit of water to erase these lines. And in my original drawing, I didn't have them actually touching up to the green part, but I'm having them touch the green part here because I'm planning out when I actually get to the sewing part, I'm going to need a way to transition between these lines. I could treat each line as a totally separate piece, stopping and starting and clipping off my threads after each one, but that's a lot of work. So I'm going to make them all lead right up into this little line here, and then that's going to be kind of my bridge, I guess, between these sort of individual lines. So when I get to the actual sewing part, I'm going to go into warp speed again, but I will tell you there's two ways to do this part. I'm just going to do regular, using my sewing machine as a sewing machine and very carefully create the lines that go into these spaces. But the other way that you can do this is you can use like a free motion embroidery setup on your sewing machine, which is kind of like, I don't like where that one line went. See, this is why I use the washout marker. So I have to draw a second line here in between those two, and hopefully when I get to the actual sewing, I remember which line to sew on, and I don't try to sew both of them because those are too close together. Anyhow, if you want to do free motion embroidery, you can do that. You do need to have a free motion embroidery foot for your sewing machine. This is mine. It's got this little spring in it that makes it pop up and down so that between each stitch that you take, the foot actually lifts up and then repositions and comes back down so that you can move the fabric around in the machine to basically draw with thread however you want. You do have to drop the feed dogs on the bottom of the machine to do that. But I know not everyone has an embroidery foot or knows how to do that. So I'm going to show you guys how I do it with just using regular straight stitch on the sewing machine. But let's go into time warp mode for that. Folks, there you have it. That is pretty much a done patch. Like I said, the final step here is going to be to take a little bit of just a damp cloth or paper towel and get the remaining blue marks that you can see off of this part here. And then the last step that I'm going to do is I'm going to take another piece of that fusible webbing that I showed you at the beginning of the video, and I'm going to put that onto the back of here. I'm going to iron it down. I have clipped off all the excess threads on the back. You don't need to tie knots because the fusible webbing is actually going to seal the whole deal here. And then I'm going to trim around this shape, and then I will iron that down on into place on the jacket itself. And then the final step will be to take a black thread and do the same zigzag that I did along the edges of the colorful pieces, but just to encase the edge of the black patch onto the jacket so that it doesn't fray itself. I did bring a couple other examples of this same technique just to show you guys. Here's another one that I did. You can see I only used a black outline on this one to really give it that cartoony, bold type of look. But this is the exact same technique that I just showed you with this one. This one is finished and ready to be put on a jacket. You can see the fusible webbing on the back of that one. So that's just ready to be ironed on. And then even though I finished the edge of this, I probably would use a zigzag edge stitch over the edge just to put that onto a jacket. And then the final thing I wanted to say is you don't have to have a sewing machine to do this technique. This one that I showed you at the very beginning is one that I made in 2013, and this is all hand sewed down. So same technique that I was talking about, but with this one, it's all hand sewn. And instead of doing a zigzag stitch over the edge to keep things from fraying, what I did there is called a blanket stitch. So I don't know if you can see the detail of that. You can also see it on the edge of the orange here. Blanket stitch is a good stitch to use if you're hand stitching and you want to keep something from fraying. And then I did the details on this just using a regular back stitch that you would use in any type of embroidery project. So you don't have to have the sewing machine. You can still achieve a great look by hand stitching. Of course, it takes a lot longer to do it with hand stitching. This one I also built the patch right onto the jacket. As you can see, there is no like canvas or other piece that's underneath that one. But like I said, this was from 2013. That was a kind of older version of how I was doing this stuff. So I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. Please let me know if you have any questions or comments down in the comments section below. I will be back in a few more days with another episode of my vlog. Till then, take care, stay safe, and thanks so much for watching.